Welcome to the CX Sessions from the Customer Experience Innovation Institute. Every episode, we provide an innovative perspective on customer experience from the people who are changing your world, one experience at a time.
Welcome back to CX Sessions from Melbourne, Australia. I'm your host, Simon Chris, and joining me today is Shaden Mohamed, who is both a Chief Customer Officer and Chief Marketing Officer. And when you talk about wanting to drive performance, is that financial performance? Is that team performance? Is that how do you kind of define that?
Yeah, definitely. Look, it's not mutually exclusive. I think if you're driving the right culture and performance culture within the team, then all else will follow. I mean, you should typically have the right business strategy, but those strategies, you could, hire the most experienced consultant from the big four firms to come in and do, the best business strategy the company has ever seen. It doesn't mean anything unless it's executed well. And that execution really comes down to the people in the organization. How they feel about the company, how they feel about their leaders, how they feel about the strategy. So I've seen that the most amazing strategies fail because the execution piece and then the culture of the team wasn't right. So that's what I mean.
Yeah, okay. And look, I'm right with you. I've always said that CX equals EX. If your employee experience is right, they're going to treat your customer right. The other thing that I just kind of heard you twig on, and I've often controversially at conferences and things said that contact centers and the like don't have teams. They have groups of people that are forced to work together. Teams are like a football team, be that an American football, a rugby, an Aussie rules team. They have a culture, they have an identity, they have people willing to surrender themselves to the betterment of that team. And what I more so see in contact centers is, that's team A and team B and team C. So getting that team ethos, I think, is a critical one.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also, it comes back to the leader of that group of people and making sure that when they are recruiting, that they are doing that with the existing team in mind. You could have, two individuals who are fantastic and highly skilled, but put them together and they will not produce the right result or the right outcomes. Their values might not be aligned, how they approach things might not be aligned. It's really important that you're recruiting people into the team who are aligned to the company values, aligned to the team values. And if they're not, that's okay. It doesn't make them bad people. They just, trying to fit that, a square peg in a round hole, as they say, is not a good idea.
Yeah, definitely. And we seem to jump right into the thick of the discussion there. If I peel back a little, I'd love to talk a little about your journey. I mean, you've worked for a number of firms. I know, I don't know that it was exactly the same time, but we both spent time inside Expedia and other type firms. What was your journey? How did you wind up in CX?
So how did I end up in CX? Of all the roles I've held, irrespective of function and the deliverables, they've all centered around driving that strong performance culture that we talked about before, and making sure that teams that I'm responsible for are engaged and experiencing work in a way that motivates them and pushes them to achieve whatever greatness is defined for them. And I think that's important because it ultimately impacts the customer at the end of the day, especially if those teams are close to that customer interaction, if they're on the front line, for example. If your teams are not motivated, they're engaged, then that absolutely does impact the customer experience. So in the early days of my career, I was working at the forefront of technology as a strategist for Google Australia.
Okay.
And our job, it doesn't seem directly connected to customer experience, but it really was, because our job at the time was to convince Fortune 500 businesses to deliver on the expectations of the customer. And at that time, I'm talking years and years ago, it meant having the right website, driving the right messaging, etc. And more interestingly, at that time, we were also talking about the expectations that customers didn't have yet. So what future expectations would be, and what companies needed to do today in order to get ahead of that and to be prepared for when that expectation hit. And an example of that would be the mobile experience, and the importance of mobile before the launch of the iPhone. So, we'd go into these meetings with C-suite executives and they'd raise their eyebrows at us when we'd say, mobile is going to be very important. And I remember very clearly being told, are you crazy? Who's going to pay for anything using their mobile? And it's just to remember those conversations and see what we do today. And in the early stages, being at the forefront of that technology with a company like Google, I'd share those experiences with my family. And my brother, who was quite young at the time, is 16 or 17. He decided to try out NFC and paying with his mobile. And he went to a convenience store one day and tapped with his phone. And the store owner threatened to call the police, thought he was stealing, didn't know what he was doing, had no idea because we hadn't really properly yet. And he had to go through and prove that he'd actually paid. So just remembering those days, and that being really the start into CX from a marketing and digital transformation lens for me. And then later, I jumped into the operational side of CX, so leading contact centers, and then eventually being responsible for the customer journey end to end with Silver Chef previously. So yeah, that's my journey in a nutshell.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny. Nobody ever, just leaves high school and says, I'm going to be in CX. We all kind of fall into the industry somewhere along the way. We try a new job out, or, we walk past the managing director's door when they decide they need a head of CX or something like that invariably happens. So it's great that you went down that same journey. Working with someone like a Google who is so, innovation is their DNA. That's what they do, right? How have you found that innovation carries on in other companies? Are you finding on the whole companies are open to innovation in CX, or is that still a little bit closed off?
Be careful how I answer this question.
I think we're stuck in the 1970s. I'll just openly declare my position, but I'm interested in yours.
Look, I'm very lucky. I've made a living off working for organizations who are behind the curve in terms of what they need to do to innovate and be at the forefront, especially for CX. So it's been a blessing in a way to have that. That is my niche. But also, it was a shock leaving a company like Google at the time to go to a business and actually just realize that how businesses operated on the outside, as Googlers would say, was fundamentally very different in good and bad ways. Google was and is an innovative company, but there are still a lot of processes internally that you would be shocked to. One of the things that my first day at Google, I was a junior consultant, very excited, and I sat down and they give you your machine. The internet wasn't working, and I was scratching my head. What? And it's done on spreadsheets, and you just wouldn't know that from the outside.
Yep.
So, look, it was a shock, and I find that there are elements within an organization that are very much innovative. Some of their processes might be ahead of the curve. Some of the things that they're developing, and they can be quite agile because if they're a smaller business, they have the ability to maneuver, ability to develop a lot more quickly than a giant behemoth of a company like a Google. But then in other ways, when you've got especially a leadership team who are not, let's say, aware of those that technology or those processes, or the forefront of what should be done for CX, a lot of the work is actually educating the leadership team, letting them know that there are things that need to be done in CX for the business to not only be more effective and more efficient, but also to survive. Because if a disruptor comes along, they'll eat their lunch, because disruptors and startups can be more agile, more innovative, and
Yep.
will meet the customer's needs. If this big organization that's been around for decades doesn't do it, someone else will eventually.
Yep. Yeah, totally agree. I too am of the view that a lot of it is still sitting in most companies' approach to CX, I think, is still a bit 1970s based, as in, you come to me. You call my phone number, you come to my website, you come to my chat, not I'm going to be where you are, but you come to me. And I think it stems from years ago when everything was a shop front and you had to come to the shop. And that just seems to have permeated. Anyway, I digress. I'd love to talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the market right now in CX. The advent of AI, and I'm probably the worst one for talking about that. But outside of that, what are you seeing? What cool stuff are you seeing in the land of CX?
Yeah, that's a great question, Simon. And it really depends on which market we're talking about. Because I'll just compare Australia, for example,
Yeah.
to other mature markets. If I want to know what the latest and greatest is in any technological space, but in particular CX, I look to the US. As a customer, the experiences you have in the US, and certainly the ones I've had personally, chalk and cheese between the US and Australia. And whenever I'm there, consuming any product or consuming any service, I'm made to feel like I am the most important person in that interaction. As though, I was a consumer of, say, I had a temporary mobile phone, and I signed up to a service while I was there for 6 months. And, customer service treated me like I'd been a customer for 10 years and, high-paying customer, and I was not. And it just made me feel like royalty. Very different to services here in Australia, that,
Yeah.
you could be a business with 10 lines and, hundreds of thousands a year in spending and still get the same experience as someone who has a, much simpler transaction history. So the
What do
things
you,
that I'm
why do you
seeing that are...
why do you think that is, by the way? Do you think it's a cultural thing? Do you think just Aussie businesses haven't gotten the value of CX yet? What do you reckon?
No, I think it's complacency, because they don't have to. So if you have a problem with a service provider, you're going to go to, there are maybe in some of the key industries might be 3 or 4 big players, and then a lot of the smaller niche players. But typically, the economic structure of our country, so you've got a smaller population, there's less competition and less choice. And then if you want to consume something which is an international, the distance makes that even more difficult, as well as the tax structure. So it's really not efficient as a customer to consume anything internationally unless it's a digital product or service. So I think it's a number of all those things, the factor of all of those things combined makes organizations a bit more complacent. Well, if we're, and at the end of the day, decisions are made based on revenue. So if we're not losing any money and, hey, we've still got roughly, we're growing a little bit every year, or we're kind of stable, like, why would we change? Why would we invest? And I just think that complacency is because we don't have a good enough landscape to enable disruption.
Agree.
That's what I think. I think everyone knows it's important, but it's working.
If the water's going in the bucket faster than in the top faster than it's running out the holes in the bottom, who cares?
Kind of.
Yeah.
I don't want to see it that way, but yes.
Yeah. And I cut you off. What else are you seeing out there?
So I'm seeing a lot of so AI is a big topic, and Simon, you talk a lot about AI in the work you do. And I totally agree with your sentiment. I heard you speak at one of the conferences recently about the lack of adoption in Australia in particular, and the fears around AI. But I'm seeing faster adoption of AI abroad. embedded into CX, and not so that they can cut staff. That's the first thing I have to say that I hear in this market. It's not to cut staff; it's actually to make things more efficient and more effective on the lower, on the things that are more simple to achieve, to free up teams and people to do things that are more strategic, more higher value, deliver better and faster service to the customer, resolve things a lot quicker. So I'm seeing that in how AI is delivering via multiple channels and can do that faster and more easily and more readily than a human can.
Yep.
You know, having to wait as a customer for a chat, for someone to chat with me doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
You know, having to hold, you know, having to do forced to do self-service when I don't want to doesn't make sense. So I've seen AI being used to overcome some of those challenges while also being commercially viable for the business, which is really exciting.
Yep. Yeah, it is. And you're absolutely right about not about reducing headcount. I keep hearing that. And sadly, I keep hearing it from vendors too, saying, buy this product and you can drop your headcount by 10. That's not the story. In fact, a lot of the work, yeah, it really is a facepalm moment. A lot of the work that I do with major corporates is around setting up their ethical and responsible framework for AI. And usually the first tenet of that framework is do no harm to humans. The second one is not using this to lower headcount. Yes, there might be some savings here or there, but how else can we use those people? How can we retrain, redeploy, reuse? So for me, I'm seeing a massive amount of retraining is going to be sitting alongside any AI deployment. Anyway, this isn't about my views, it's about yours. And I'd love you to look into your crystal ball. And where do you think where do you think we're going with CX? What's it going to look like in a couple of years' time?
Yeah, and it comes back to me on comes back to the basic principles around, you know, the focus of organizations, irrespective of the tools. So, you know, AI is the big topic, but if you go back over the last decade, you'll have a look at all the different vendors and the different services and tools that they're offering and all the shiny new toys, as we like to say. And they can do amazing things, but how many are actually adopted properly within organizations and leveraged to their maximum capability? Even in the organizations I've worked for, we've got, you know, the latest and greatest tools in some cases, and maybe 20-30% of those tools and their features are used. So I don't think it's, when you ask me that question, I'm not thinking about technology per se. I'm actually thinking about culture in the workplace and what's becoming more important for organizations and for customers who consume their products and services. So customers are going to, you know, we're already very impatient as consumers. So anything that centers around driving efficiency or effectiveness for the customer, you know, being able to give the customer what they need, and the time in which you do that has to be almost real time. You know, it has to be almost real time. I think customers are not going to tolerate that when they can jump online themselves now and get the answers they need. They're getting it from, you know, the internet has opened up lots of possibilities. You're seeing a lot of people, you know, driving their own revenue and income, you know, by using AI, because it, you know, lowers the barrier to entry.
Yep.
So you can set up a website, write a book, write an article in next to no time now, without having skills, and eventually be able to program and not be a software developer to do that. So I think with consumers doing that in the personal space or in their with their interests separate to how they consume products, they're going to expect organizations to do that for them as well. That's and I feel that the tools that are being developed at the moment, and the technology being developed in AI in particular, just lowers the barrier to entry. So I think a lot of disruption will happen. I think we'll see a lot of startups coming in and doing things in a way that bigger organizations cannot. And I think we're going to see fragmentation across our industries. That's going to hurt a lot of organizations, but it's needed, because I think from the plus side of that, Simon, that's when organizations stop being complacent. So I think we'll see a lot more efficiency and effectiveness, and ultimately better service being delivered to the customer because of that. But we need to go through that period of purge for that to happen.
Yeah, and I think everything you've said is dead on. The customer expectations are just going to rise and rise and rise, and that, I mean, as it is now in Australia, when you call, I won't say names, but you call companies and you hear you're up for a 40-minute wait. It's like 40 minutes. What? I don't want to wait 4 minutes. I don't want to wait 40 seconds. I want you right, want you right now. But yeah, interesting. If you were mentoring somebody who was just starting out in CX, what would be your one bit of advice that you'd give them?
Comes back to something very simple. And even as someone who has been in the space for a long time, I always have to remember this, and sometimes I fail to do this. And it's back to how the customer is interacting and making sure you experience that. So if you're starting out in CX, before you go into solution mode, the first thing you need to do is understand what the customer is experiencing, and you need to see it firsthand. An example I gave the other day was, how many times you walk into an organization and you can count the number of people in that organization who have actually consumed that product, if it's possible to do so, or who have gone through that journey in the same way the customer has. How many people have actually gone onto their company website and gone through the motions? Even marketing teams don't do that sometimes, and it just boggles my mind. So it's easy to get caught up in, if you're in CX in particular, it's very easy to get caught up in business strategy and the KPIs of every department, and the different and NPS surveys. I'm very cynical, but anyway, and all the things like that. But really, it comes back to, do you actually understand what the customer is experiencing and what their pain points are, and where we can actually make it a great experience without plugging in $1 million tool to do it?
Yeah,
that's the advice I would give to someone coming into CX.
That's great advice. That's fantastic advice, actually. Okay, I'm going to shift gears in as we move towards a close. I have 3 questions that I love to ask everybody that comes on the show. The first one is, what makes a great customer experience for you? So you personally, Shaden's out and about doing whatever it is you do. What is it that makes a great experience for you?
Contrary to what some may think, it's not about giving me as a customer what I want all the time. That to me doesn't define a good experience. It's making sure that when I have an interaction with your business, that interaction is positive in the way that not necessarily giving me what I want, but positive in terms of all the things that would make it a great interaction. So, the right information, patience, someone on the other end who I feel is invested in whatever it is we're talking about, that I'm not just made to feel like a number. So if that interaction is positive, and at minimum, if it's transparent and efficient, then that is a good experience for me. So I might, as an example, I might have a problem with my phone bill. I might call the company and want to discuss that issue with someone. And at the end of that call, I might not get that resolution for me that I want, but I could still walk away from that interaction feeling good. I could still walk away from that interaction feeling like this company is the right company to stick with.
Okay.
So that's what it means for me.
No, that's great. Second question is, what do you wish Australian companies were just doing more of in this CX space? What should they all be doing more of?
Investing the time in education around what is possible.
Okay.
Not
educating staff or customers or both?
Starting with their internal. So educating their leaders and their staff around what is possible, and making sure that they're listening to what the customers are saying. Really listening. So understanding what customers need, their expectations are, and how they're currently experiencing their organisation in whichever way it's product or service. That's what I wish more organisations would spend doing, listening to their customers and educating their people about up and coming and what's important.
That's probably one of the best answers I've had of any of the interviews that I've done around this,
Oh.
because of the part that you said at the beginning. It's about people understanding what's possible, not what it is today, but what's possible. I get a sense that you're a bit of a divergent thinker, and like to focus on the art of the possible rather than the known, and I totally appreciate that. The third question that we have, one of my favourites, is what book are you reading right now, or what podcast are you listening to, or what's influencing you?
Yeah, good.
Other than your son.
Everything I read, it doesn't matter what the topic is, I can translate in some way to help me with my parenting for my child.
Right.
I often say, on a side note, I often say to my team, this is my holiday time. When I'm working with you, this is my holiday time. The real work begins at 6 p.m. I go home. So the book I'm reading at the moment is a book called Solve for Happy by Mo Goldat.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of it?
I know Mo. Yep.
Yeah, so Mo, so I used to work for Mo's department. So he was managing, at the time that I was at Google in the Middle East, he was managing that region and broader. And so he was the head of that region when I was working, and I've interacted with him a few times, and he's an inspiration to me, and he wrote the book Solve for Happy in a way that I don't think anyone's ever approached the topic before. So I'm really enjoying that at the moment. I'm listening to a lot of his talks and podcasts as well. And then the book I have listed for next week, which you're going to have to sign for me, is yours.
Oh. You mean
AI
this book?
promotion.
Yeah, thank you for the plug. Yeah.
The AI-empowered customer experience. You're someone, Simon, in the space who is at the forefront of AI in particular, and AI as it pertains to CX. So really curious to see how you unpack that a little bit more in your book. So I've got that down on my list for next week or this weekend. If I'm testing it. And then when we meet, sign up for me. Little bit
of pressure on me there, but yeah, that'll all be good. It's funny that you mentioned Mo too, because I have about 6 books stacked up on my bedside table that I'm trying to get through, and the second one down, the one I'm reading next, is his latest Scary Smart. And so I'm kind of looking forward to reading that. I think that'll be great. Well, look, we're right at time. Shaden, thank you so much. I know that people, the listeners, all 3 of them that listen to this podcast are going to get a lot out of today, and I've really enjoyed it. So thanks for being a part of CX Sessions.
Thank you, Simon. Absolute pleasure. I've had a great time.
We'll chat soon.
Bye.
That's it for this session. Let us know what you think or recommend someone for a future session at cxii.com.au. This podcast is brought to you by the Customer Experience Innovation Institute. Thanks for joining us, and tune in again soon to hear more CX sessions.